At night, just outside Florence, there are quiet dirt pull-offs where couples used to park for privacy, until Tuscany learned to fear headlights in the trees, because between 1968 and 1985, a killer the press named the Monster of Florence targeted people in the most ordinary moment of their lives and turned it into a national nightmare. The pattern was chillingly consistent. Young couples, secluded lanes, cars stopped, and an attacker who seemed to arrive like weather, silent, sudden, and gone before anyone could understand what they'd witnessed. And what made investigators believe these scattered scenes were connected wasn't just the terror, it was the forensic thread. Multiple attacks were linked to a .22 caliber Beretta pistol, and the violence often included a close-range approach that suggested the killer wanted control and time, not chaos. Italy in those years was already strained by public anxiety and sensational media pressure, and the case became a storm of sirens, headlines, and whispers. He's local. He watches. He returns. Because the murders didn't come in a single spree, but in waves, separated by months, sometimes years, each time reigniting the same question in every home and bar. How can someone keep doing this and vanish back into normal life? Investigators chased leads that seemed promising and then collapsed. Early attention focused on the first double homicide in 1968, but the killings later resumed in a way that convinced many it was something larger than a single domestic crime. And as bodies were found and the public demanded certainty, the case hardened into legend. The maniaco delle coppiette, the maniac of couples, someone who knew the countryside and the rhythms of human secrecy. In the 1990s, authorities arrested Pietro Pacciani, a farm laborer with a criminal past. And for a moment it looked like the decades-long puzzle was finally solving itself. Pacciani was convicted at first instance in 1994, but later acquitted on appeal in 1996. And before a new trial could fully play out, he died, leaving behind a court record that satisfied some and enraged others. Because the monster case was never only about a verdict. It was about whether the verdict fit the evidence, and whether the evidence could ever fully explain the pattern. Later, the courts convicted Mario Vanni and Giancarlo Lotti for involvement in some of the murders. But even with convictions on the books, the wider story refused to close. Journalists, families, and researchers kept pointing to contradictions, controversial investigative theories, missing pieces, and the uncomfortable possibility that the person, or people, who controlled the Beretta and chose those nights were never definitively identified. And that is why, decades later, the Monster of Florence still feels like a living case rather than a historical one. Relatives have publicly pushed for re-examination. Reports have surfaced about new DNA work and renewed forensic interest. And modern retellings keep returning to the same haunting image. Two people in a car, a quiet Tuscan lane, and a presence that seems to know exactly when to strike. Because in the end, the scariest part isn't only what happened, it's what didn't. The murder weapon has never been conclusively recovered. The narrative has been pulled in different directions by confessions and counterclaims, and the file has lived for years in that uneasy space between solved enough and not solved at all, where a community is asked to accept closure without certainty. So if you're listening to this late at night, here's the thought Tuscany couldn't escape. When a killer targets secrecy itself, every hidden place becomes a stage, and every silence becomes evidence. If you want the next real case documentary in this series, New Country, New People, New Nightmare, hit subscribe and check the description for the sources used in this episode.